It's my absolute pleasure to have as our very first guest on our podcast, Pastor Tompkins, his close and old friend and somebody who I have respected from the very first time that we met. Welcome, Al.
Lorenzo, you're so kind. Thank you so much. It's a real privilege for me to be here and to share this podcast and to be the first to be here.
No,
that's fantastic. Thank you.
Not have thought of anybody better deserving.
Thank you so much.
So, Al, you are an intriguing figure. You're a little bit older than me. You have 11 grandkids, several children. Your wife still loves you, so you tell me. I
believe that's true.
As I've known you, you have always been a man of great character and very true to the words that you speak. You live out what you speak.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you grew up, where you grew up, and what was your life like as a child?
Well, there's a lot there, but much of it has to do with my parents and their lives. I had two parents, which is unusual to say that for today in our family dynamic. But I had two parents, and I knew they loved me. There were challenges and all of that stuff. I'm the oldest of. I have a brother and sister, and so they just taught me how to care for people. Often we would have people at our house that we didn't know, that my father would be walking. He didn't have a car for a while, so he'd walk to work, and it was probably about a couple of miles or so. And he used to work on the sanitation truck here in Schenectady, and he worked very hard. But often he'd come across people on his way home. Wow. And he would invite them for dinner.
Come on, please don't tell me he's one of those dudes who just brought random strangers out.
He'd invite them for dinner. I remember a few times where it happened that he said, I remember him coming in and talking to my mother and saying, "Well, hon, we always prepare a lot for dinner." He says, "Well, I just met this guy along the way, and we just started talking, and he's really struggling."
Now, was your mom upset about that? Or
not at all. That was kind of her frame as well. It's very different, but that was her style. They used to serve.
You, as a child, you had these random people at the dinner table.
Yes.
And learned what from them?
I learned that life was not always fair. And I learned that love had to be given and received. I learned from those times. So I remember one time having this fella at the table, and he was kind of scraggly looking, and my mother had him wash his hands before sitting down, and that was to be very clean and sit at the table, that kind of thing. And it was just it was just very quiet and kind of weird. And I was staring at the guy, and my mother looked at me, and it was one of those looks. Stop staring. What's wrong with you?
What are you doing, kid? Yeah.
So I went back to eating. And I picked up from that just the love that my parents had for people.
So okay, where did that come from? Where did that love dynamic come from in your parents?
They came from. They had a hard beginning. My grandparents. It's lots there. My grandparents, on my father's side, my father's parents, came through some hard things. Were around sharecroppers at that time.
Wow.
They weren't too far. My father's parents weren't too far from that whole thing of slavery, but then there was the Jim Crow laws going on and all of that, and so. We had I consider myself blessed, where my parents were not bitter with it, but they were cautious, but they were not bitter, and yet they continued to love people. And God was there with my parents way back when, and my parents' parents.
Right.
They talked about going to Sunday school and learning things about who God is, even though Jim Crow was a tough thing.
Yeah.
Colored people drank water here or went to this fountain or this restaurant. White people went to this other place. In the midst of those struggles, God was who he was.
That's beautiful.
And they could connect with him. And they knew that no matter what, God loved them. And that they were not to pass on this anger and inequality and all that stuff. And so
that's profound.
So it was that they passed down to their children. We didn't have much. I didn't know I was poor until high school. I mean, I never went without food or without clothing. And I never knew what the dynamics of the bills and things like that. I never knew about that. My parents took care of those things, and they just loved us.
Now, were you a nerd or a jock at school?
Oh, I was the jock at school.
You were?
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be funny. You are a good-looking guy. I've always said to you, and many others have agreed with me, especially your wife. I mean, you could be Denzel Washington's brother, and you've always been
thank you.
nothing. I mean, how many times have I said that? I wish we were literally physical brothers,
Yes,
because you are just such a special, wonderful guy. But typically, Josh can be a pain in the neck. So
yeah.
Were you that typical jock, or were you? I imagine you as a friendlier, warmer, funnier jock.
I was a hostile jock. During my teen years. There were things that went on in my life, and I got very, very angry, and was mean. On the outside, I was very polite, and would help people, but on the inside there was a boiling fire. Wow. And I dare say that we were just talking about it. I was talking with some friends just the other day, and we were talking about how God intervenes in our lives. And beautiful. He contradicts the things that we've been taught and the things that we think about, And the things that I would think about weren't very good. And then when it came down to race, even though we were not a racist household, but yet those things, we knew what it was to grow up in a dominant, the dominant culture, which was Caucasian. Right. And so I knew how to exist out there in the Caucasian community, and then come home and really be myself. Be okay with being myself. But that created some tension.
So in high school, you were already conscious of having to live not a double life, but aware that
in middle school, junior high, 7th grade, 7th grade.
For those of our listeners who are international, what age would that be?
I was about 11, 12 years old.
And were your friends around you, did they have the same awareness, or was it more something that you held to yourself?
It was. It wasn't until I turned 13 and I was around other African Americans that we were all very conscious of who we were, and so that there were drawbacks in how we lived a certain way, because we had to be a certain way, because we knew we lived in a white culture,
right?
And we knew that even the people that were around us, some of the adults didn't understand us.
Right.
Which was very sad, which I think our young people today, they get it.
Right.
They
Well,
get
do
a
you
great
mean,
deal.
what, sorry, let's talk a little bit about that. So do you mean that maybe your parents, your grandparents, your uncles and aunts didn't understand what you were feeling and thinking, or?
Oh, this is a very charged topic, a very complicated,
Sure.
very emotional, because my parents, well, with my father's father, his daughter. So my father's sister was murdered.
Wow.
She was poisoned
Oh.
by these white guys, and they were in the South.
Oh, my word.
When they invited her to dinner, her and her friends, but they poisoned her dish.
Oh.
And so, and when it all came out, it was because she was black. And
Wow.
you know,
Sorry to hear.
and so you have some of that kind of wound
Sure.
to come forward,
Yeah.
where so that was passed on to. Then it was my father, and his other sister was left, and but yet I didn't hear that story until much later. But you could see by how their actions, how they
Right.
treat. I couldn't go over anybody's house to
Right.
eat.
Right. Wow.
For a very long time, because that fear was there.
Right.
So, so there's a lot to this. They were very aware of how to. It was more of. It wasn't a fear, but it was just being aware of
Right.
how you may be mistreated.
More caution.
Caution,
maybe? Yeah.
a cautious way of life,
Mm-hmm.
which gives pressure to kids.
Sure.
I don't know what to do with that.
And you know, as children, you sense these things.
Oh yes.
I mean,
Yes.
they're there subconsciously. And,
Yeah.
And it's true. It's only much later on in life when you begin to have certain feelings or certain ways of thinking.
Yes.
And then you trace it back to,
Yes.
that's where that came from.
Yes.
Now, you're a courageous leader and a fearless man of God, and I've often said to you, one of the things I most love and respect about you is how you have literally given your life for the sake of what I would call the glory of God on the one hand and the good of others on the other hand. I've always known you to be this male version of Mother Teresa, good-looking male version. But seriously, obviously this comes out of a very deep faith. When were you first aware of God, of the Bible, of Jesus Christ, more than in a typical religious sense? You know, I think in our generation, like, you went to church.
Yeah.
You didn't necessarily believe anything. And
Yeah.
in fact, the minute you could get out of there, you were out of there.
Yes.
But you seem to have a very close walk with Jesus. When did that come about? In the midst of all of this, I would call it trauma, right? And this difficulty in a very different time in history. How and when did you meet Christ?
I went to a camp, a Christian camp, and I was 12 years old. And the church that we were going to, often my parents would send us. There was a bus ministry that was happening, and the bus this church, First Presbyterian Church, and they would send a bus around and pick up children and bring them back to the church. And we'd go to Sunday school, and then some would stay for church, but most of us went home, and so they'd get us back on the bus and bring us back home. Now, they did this every Sunday, and I went for years. But it was through that this church, they were affiliated with this Christian camp. And so one year I was 12 years old. I had the opportunity to go to the camp, went to the camp, had a great time. It was an overnight camp. The guys with guys, girls with girls. I had a counselor, and his name was Ken. I can't remember his last name, but he was going to Wheaton College at the time. And I was an athlete then. I was in 6th grade. And I was really impressed with he was built well, he was in great shape, he could run fast, all those things, you know.
And because you were a jock, that would have appealed to you.
Yeah, that appealed to me.
That's good.
So and I could also, and I was a tough kid.
Yeah.
And so I also found that I couldn't beat him. he was a tough guy, you know. And so, but anyway, we used to we would go to the campfires at the end of the day. I went for a week. To the camp for a week. So we'd register on a Sunday afternoon, and we'd bring all of our sleeping bags, and it was overnight camp. We'd be there until the following Saturday, so 6 days. So I went there, and the first couple of nights it was just kind of weird. We were sleeping outside, and it was just weird. And but they would tell these stories, and these stories, I connected with those stories because I heard them in Sunday school.
Right.
And so I said, "Whoa, I understand what that story is. I've heard that. That's a Bible story. That's about God or something like that." And so it was at that time that the Lord started to really grab my attention. So much so that it was by the end of that week, we were at a campfire, and my counselor got up and shared a devotion, talked about Jesus and who he is. I can't remember all the pieces. It was a long time ago. But I remember him saying, if you want to follow this Jesus of the Bible that I'm talking about, and he can change your life, if you want to follow him, he says, you talk with me after. He says, it's not gonna be a big deal. You don't have to stand up, come forward. But he says, you come and you talk to me afterward. So later
it's good, because then that would have caused only people who were serious about the commitment to do that, to follow. It was their decision.
Yes.
Yeah, that's good.
And so I spoke with him, and I asked Christ into my life.
Wonderful.
I recognized that I was a sinner. I recognized that I practiced things that were wrong, and I knew I thought about stuff that was wrong. And he says, God sees everything, and I really got embarrassed because he knows me, that kind of thing. But it wasn't until that's why I'm big on discipleship. It's so important. People come to know Jesus. Well, what is that about? That's just the beginning of their journey.
It's the birth, like a baby's birth. Literally.
Oh yeah,
you can't just leave the baby on the operating
table. Not at all.
Sure.
Not at all. Or hope that things will work out for them.
Right. That's good.
Good. So I wasn't discipled. I knew that Jesus knew me, and there was something different.
Right.
But it wasn't really until I was 16. I had just turned 16, and I went to a camp again, a Christian camp, another camp, and rededicated my life to the Lord, and really said, I'm going to live for you. Wow. And it was at that time that it was like God knew me, and I knew him. Mm-hmm. And, he was all right with who I was. Mm-hmm. And it was powerful.
Maybe the first time one could say that you met Jesus as Savior, but the second time at this other camp, he became Lord.
He became my Lord,
right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And how did this relationship with Christ, and this is not a religious podcast, mm-hmm. So for those who are listening who maybe are not people of faith, I'm wanting you to learn about Al and learn about him. We're going to get into speaking about his leadership in a few minutes, but just wanted to give this background because so much of his leadership is informed mm-hmm. not by his religion, but by his relationship with God. Mm-hmm. So how did this change, this transformation, then directly impact you as a person? What actually changed about you from that moment onwards?
I used to fight all the time.
Yeah,
I was a very angry young man, and I used to fight all the time. Then it suddenly changed that I can no longer do those things, mm-hmm. and I didn't understand that But I just knew I could no longer do that. And you know something? I developed a prayer relationship with God.
Lovely.
And as a teenager, I would pray and I would see prayers answered. And that was just the relationship that he and I had.
Right.
And it was just really very powerful. And so it changed even in the midst of, and I was still crazy now. I wasn't Mr. Good. I was involved in this gang thing, and I told these guys, I says, I can no longer do these things.
Yeah, I'm sure that went down really
well. Oh, really? But they knew I was crazy, and I was a thin guy and a smaller guy, but they knew I was crazy. Yeah. So they weren't going to push me too far.
Right.
So we had some of those conversations, and they would just, and I remember one of my close buddies said, well, we'll just, that's cool, Al, you're talking about that. They called me Alfred. It's cool, Alfred, but we'll see how this all works out. And God just began to really.
So you were consistent with it. It wasn't something that you did for a few weeks and then.
No.
Which too often happens.
I'd crash and burn from time to time, but then I'd get back up and try to do the right thing and crash a little bit.
When would you say you were first aware that you had a leadership ability or leadership gift, or and I think the simplest and truest definition of a leader is that it's ultimately somebody who has followers. So whether you have dreadful evil leaders like Hitler or really great wonderful leaders like Churchill, for example. Whatever, it's leaders are leaders, and they're defined by the fact that they have followers. Is there a point looking back, or what is your earliest memory of you having some leadership ability that people were willing to follow you?
I was 14. I was in 8th grade, and there were some things before that as well. I think I was in 6th grade, but the one memory was very powerful. I was 14, and I went to apply for a summer job. That was the cool thing all the older teens were doing, and I wanted to be a part of that and asked my mother and father, can I do this? And they reluctantly said, yeah, okay, well, and they had to fill out some paperwork. So I went for the job, and I discovered that the job was a tutoring job. And I was never a great academics, but I liked math and science. And so I was able to started helping some children.
Fantastic.
With their reading and math and things like that. But after that, I discovered I had a following of my peers would even got involved in this, and
so
some
you convinced others of your French of your circle, to begin to serve these kids.
And I didn't really understand it, but I just said, "Here's what I'm doing."
Right, it was a natural, organic thing.
Yeah, I said, "Here's what I'm doing. We're doing this, and we're helping some kids out. You know how to do this, and you know how to do. Why don't you apply for the job?" And some of them didn't get the job, but they volunteered.
Excellent.
And they stayed, and there was a group of us that were helping kids in the community. It was just very.
So how many years ago was that now? Without giving away your precious age.
A long time ago. That was 40 years ago. 50 years.
Why I ask is 4 or 5 decades, friends. Yes, he is older than me, although you could never tell looking at us. But why I ask is that it is amazing to me, this question of are leaders born or made? And when I think about in the scriptures in Romans chapter 12, when it speaks about the father gifts, and one of them is leadership, another one is administration, another one is generosity. And, because my fundamental drive in life is this idea that every single one of us is completely unique, that God made us very particularly and marvelously, as it says in Psalm 139, in our mother's womb. In other words, we are not the product of our parents. Yes, we carry their DNA and all that stuff, but we are firstly the design of God, and hence the name of the podcast and of my ministry. It's intentionally called Live Unique, that we live our uniqueness. So therefore, it's for me, it's logical and reasonable to be able to say that true leaders are born. Yes, you can make leaders out of almost everybody, not everybody, almost everybody, but true leaders are born, and it manifests very early on. Sometimes you see a bunch of 6-year-olds playing in the yard, and there's that one kid who's able to rally all the other 6-year-olds it's like herding cats, but somehow they manage to do it.
Yes.
So in terms of your leadership, being that you've led as a father, as a husband, as a father, as a grandfather, as a pastor, as a social activist, as a community leader, so you've led in various different situations that you found yourself. But what's great for me about you is that you've always led people directly, not from a distance. You've always led from among them. And the example Jesus gives us is that one, right?
Yes.
So what would you say are the 3 main lessons that you have learned over 40, 50 years of leadership? What does a leader need to be and do more than anything else? And we can talk about it,
A leader needs to be a listener.
That's beautiful.
Needs to be a listener to, my focus needs to be a listener to God first. And then a listener to people. And a listener it's the active listening where you're
what do you mean
you're engaged. Sometimes we can move through our day and people say things to us and we nod and say, yeah. But 2 minutes later, if you ask me what that person said, I had no clue what they said. But I did say yes. Active listening is being fully engaged. Let me stop what I'm doing and hear what you're saying. And sometimes, and I've had the opportunity to many times to stop what I'm doing. So I've made that part of my lifestyle. As we talk with people, as we engage with them, to really stop and listen. Whatever, just stop and listen. And it sends them a message that they're important. It lets them know that somebody cares about them.
And that they have value.
And that they have value. Yes.
So does that come out of because you are a pastor in every sense of the word, as Noel, our good friend, my dad-in-law, often says, you're a pastor with a capital P. So there are many leaders that have a measure of the pastoral in them, let's say. And then there are leaders that are pastors, like Christ, that are truly shepherds. Their whole instinct is for the sheep, even if it costs them their own time, energy, life, money. So does that desire, that instinct, which is absolutely true, by the way, of course, to really listen to people, does that come out of your pastoral gift and your pastoral makeup?
It comes out of how God has just designed me. I don't know. I know I'm a pastor, but that's how He's designed me.
So that's part of your uniqueness, then.
Yes, I look back to even when I was a little kid. I always had a little kid, as in 4, 5, 6 years old. Had different people that were around me. That were my friends, and it was many times they were the people that it seemed like no one else cared about.
Yes, I can easily imagine.
So that's good. So these were people that the Lord had placed me in the midst of, and I didn't understand that then.
It was just a natural
what a privilege
instinct.
it is to look back and to see. I didn't get here overnight, and it's not like I've arrived, but it's how God has designed my journey.
Right.
And
But your journey, let's say what you do, has to flow out of who you are,
Yeah.
right? So
Yes.
at Live Unique, our whole push is to answer two questions. I think they are life's two most important questions, which are, who must I be? Because if God has made me to be a certain way,
Yes.
there's a mustness about, I must be that,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Otherwise,
yes.
what am I on earth for?
Yes.
It's not even about the fear of failing Him. It's really more about the tragedy of missing out this incredible, stunning, beautiful, singular, unique thing that God has made you to be.
Yes.
And then, of course, you can't separate your doing from your being.
Yes.
You know, today when people talk about finding your sweet spot, to me, the definition of a sweet spot is somebody who's doing out of their being. You know, they use language like "do what you love with people that you love."
Yes.
Well, I think the love has to come out of what the God of love put into you in your mother's womb, and
Yes.
and equipped you in the womb with
Yes.
all that you would need for the rest of your life. So yes,
That's right.
I absolutely am firm. Thank you for confirming this for us. I didn't know you were going to say this. That's wonderful. No, it is incredibly encouraging because I'm firmly. This is a conviction for me. I firmly believe, I'm convinced of this, that you cannot escape who God has made you. And when you look
That's
back,
right.
however difficult your upbringing or however easy your upbringing's been, you look back and you see the signs. You know,
That's
it's
right.
like you've been given a song to sing and you sing it from the moment that you come out of your womb.
Yes.
So you were starting to lead caringly, pastorally, already from as a child through your teenage years, and then you met your wife,
Yes.
your intriguing, fascinating, lovely, interesting, very clever wife,
Yes.
and together you had your kids. And what? My question earlier was, what were three of the main lessons? All right,
Right.
so I would say for the second one. What's the major leadership lesson that you've learned as a father and husband?
You know, it's just to be real. It's just to be real. It's to have a person be a person of integrity.
Okay.
So I'll do the right action rather. If anybody's looking or not, I will still do the right thing.
That's good.
And so, so important in married life.
Now, is that authenticity or integrity or both? Is it a
Oh, that's
mix?
good. That's good. That's what I think of being real. It's an authenticity.
Okay.
There's an authenticity that has, I think, integrity linked to it.
Right.
That's what makes it so
Okay.
powerful.
Right.
As my wife and I, we've been married for over 40 years now.
Wow. Congratulations.
And thank you. And we've been blessed with 4 beautiful children. 3 of them, 2 of them are married. 3 of them are married, and one is not married yet. And out of those 3 marriages, there's 11 grandchildren.
Wonderful.
And and I'm discovering that being authentic it's a learning journey. I mean,
So when you say being authentic, because the context is leading your wife and kids and your
Yes,
grandkids now.
yes.
So give me an example. What do you mean?
oh my, as husbands and fathers, as leaders, people will whisper in our ear outside of our household, say, "Hey, you're doing this great. You're doing that," and when you get home, my wife says, "Hey, can you take out the garbage?" I'm like, "Well, wait a minute, dear. I just saved the world today. I did this. I did that." But it's part of being that authentic. I'm real. The way I am at home is the way I am.
What you see
public.
is what you get. Right?
Yes,
Right.
and,
That's very true. Yes.
and look to live consistently.
Can you give us an example in your life and be as open and as transparent as you want or not, where you faced a difficulty as a family, the whole family, not just you and Tay, and you had to lead the family through that difficulty. They were looking to you.
That's a great question. I was a machinist by trade, went to school, and became a machinist, and worked as a machinist for some 10, 11 years, and we were very involved in our church. And the Lord called us, I sensed the call into ministry, the call to serve Him. Now, as a machinist, I made good money. It was a good living. Things were just kind of moving up to another level, but God called me to serve Him. And I remember coming home and sharing with my wife. You know, it was a journey. It was months and months, and we talked and we prayed and wondered about this and how is it going to work and what are you going to do and things like that. But I remember coming home and mentioning to her that I had left my job. I gave my 2-week notice in, and she said, "What?" Now we have 4 kids, as I said, and at that time, one was a teenager, 2 were just about one was a teenager, the other one was coming into their teens, and then there was 2 young ones, and so it's like, okay, well, what does that mean? Where are you going to work now? What are you going to do? And so we talked and we prayed through that. And so it gave me opportunity to lead in that. It was hard. It was hard in the sense of it was just all unknown. But I knew that this is what God wanted us to do.
Practically, how did you lead? What kind of decisions did you make?
So the thought was to go and prepare for the ministry. I had some schooling behind me, and that kind of thing. I had gone to college and all of that, but it was a different type of schooling. It was more engineering type schooling. Mm-hmm. And so now what God, I believe, was calling me to was to prepare for ministry. Mm-hmm. So in our thinking, it was to go to school and go to a Bible school, a Bible college, right. Go to seminary. So that kind of thing. So that's what we did.
And you were working at the same time.
Oh, yes. Yes. We yes.
So in terms of, I think what I'm getting at is that in terms of the way that you had to choose to spend your time between work and study and family.
Yes.
Would you do it again?
Oh, without a doubt. Mm-hmm. I would do it differently because it was very tough on my wife and my family. But I would do it again. Mm-hmm. It's no doubt about it.
So did your wife or kids ever say to you, what were you thinking? Are you nuts?
No, they didn't. Okay. They were wondering about it all and how's it going to work. And then after a while, we prepared, and it was 4 years. We moved away from our home, mm-hmm. which was our family. We both grew up in town here, and so we moved away from them to something completely different. And so we lived on college campuses, and it was 4 years.
We were on 2 different. All of its own.
Yes, we were on 2 different college campuses.
But that's what I mean is that when there's a foundation of love and respect,
yes,
it's easier, I find, to lead from that kind of a foundation, right? Yes. And if you can properly lead your wife and your children, I believe you can lead anything else, pretty much, right?
Yes,
because that's the most difficult in some ways, and obviously the most significant and important group of people that you have to lead. What would be the third lesson? And in this context, let me just say for our listeners that Al is deeply involved, has been for decades, in the inner city life of the city of Schenectady, where there is a tremendous amount of both entrepreneurship, creativity, but also brokenness and poverty. It's a typical not just American, anywhere around the world, a typical inner city space. And Al worked at a place called the City Mission, helping folks who had lost everything in their lives, homeless people, broken people. So he's known throughout the city. I could say without any fear of contradiction that Al is literally a father in the city of Schenectady. How have you led in the community? What does it take to lead in a community, especially one as diverse and as complex and as interesting as what Schenectady is?
That's another good question. To lead in our community, it takes people that will be willing to stand at the cold face of difficulty, of complexity. And knowing that I trust God, and knowing that He has designed me in a particular way to do the work that He's called me to do in a unique manner.
Right.
And so I stand at you hear what I'm saying. I stand at the cold face of that, being okay because God is leading and directing me, and that He's using me in the way that will uniquely be the journey that He's placed me on, but that will speak into the lives of people.
So give our listeners a couple of examples of what does that look like on a Monday?
Well, what that looks like, it's been a journey that's in the making. I've since left my the church that I was attending, and have answered this call to be more involved in the school district.
Let me just interrupt you quickly. So recently, Al left a settled, safe, predictable, wonderful church to step out in faith at his age, and he's not a spring chicken. And although you look like you flipping 25, it makes me so jealous. But truly, and at a stage of his life where theoretically he should be slowing down to prepare for retirement, Al has done completely the opposite. He and his wife, and has taken the bull by the horns and has shown enormous courage and has gotten involved in the school system in the local city, school system. And I mean, it's like this adventure that you've embarked on.
Yes.
Most people would say, "Are you drunk? Like, are you crazy? What's wrong with you?"
Right. Lots of challenge, but God has designed us in a certain way.
Right. That's
and
beautiful. You can't escape your God.
No, you can't. No, you can't.
Right?
No, you can't.
You can run away from it, but you can't escape it. It follows you wherever
Yes,
you
it
go.
does. Yes, it does. And it eventually bleeds out into
all
that you're doing. So, so we've made this decision to move forward, and what that looks like is a lot of prayer. I meet with community leaders, pastors, and also community leaders, and we have times of prayer, and the Lord brings us into places, and He works things out, but He also calls us to work, to do the work, and so. Some of that in that doing the work is creating some kind of strategy how we're going to do it. And really this door has opened in the school district where we have been praying for a number of years, maybe 13, 14 years. And the Lord has given us favor with the superintendent and with others, and built relationships. And so I saw this as something that I just needed to step into, because this was a natural step for me.
Right. Everything else had built towards this point.
Yes. It had built toward this point. So naturally you step into that place where God is leading.
Our time is nearly up. I want to ask you a couple of questions. The first one is, if you had to do your life over again, and again, particularly in terms of leadership, what is the single biggest mistake you've made as a leader? Or is there one thing about your leadership that you feel needs improvement, or that you would have done differently if you had your life again?
I would. That's good. I had to think about that. It's really, when you've been called to do something, to step to it right away. And if anything, to change or do differently, I would step to it right away. Right. I was 14 when the Lord called me to pastor. Right. And I said, "Oh no, not me!" Right, yeah, kind of thing. But I believe that was the beginning of the journey.
Don't hesitate. Don't hesitate. Time. When God opens a door,
when He opens the door, you take it.
Take it. What would you say then? My final question is what would you say is the best thing you've done as a leader? What's been the strongest part of your leadership? I know there are like 100 things.
Yeah, right.
I'm not even kidding, but
yeah. I'm a family guy, and
that's beautiful.
And my concern is that my wife do all that she can do, right, that the way God has designed her, and that our children do all that they can do as God has designed them, and that means in their with their spouses and with their children, So I would say the big thing has been my family.
Beautiful, and it shows. They adore you. They love you. Is there a word of advice that you would give to leaders? We have friends, leaders through the global family on every continent on earth, from so many different cultures, different walks of life. Some are artists, some are professors, some are pastors, some are school teachers. If there could be one bit of wisdom, leader to leader, that you would leave with them, what would that be?
I would say... we've all been uniquely designed, fearfully and wonderfully made. And I would say you listen very closely to what God says, and then you move on that. That would take into account whether you're married or single or in college or whatever. But the first priority is to listen to God, because He's the center of it all.
Right, that's beautiful.
Otherwise, the other things they might help you along, but they're not going to give the same benefit and grace and all of that than if you begin with God. And
Alfred, thank you. It's been nothing but a pleasure. What an absolute privilege to have you with us.
Thank you so much.
You've said so many profound and important things.
Thank you.
And we value you.
Thank you. I value you too, brother.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.